Welcome back to Balmer's Workshop. Thanks so much for stopping by again. It is always great to have you here. Today we're having a look at a brand new project. This is a Mitsubishi Pajero Mini, a tiny little vehicle to say the least. This little truck was in production from 1994 until 2012, although after 2008 it was known as the Mitsubishi Kicks, but same vehicle. It was available with a 660cc engine, either normally aspirated or turbocharged, ranged from 50 to 64 horsepower depending on your choice of aspiration, and 56 to 97 foot-pounds of torque were available. Tiny vehicle is definitely the case. It weighs only 1,874 pounds or 850 kilos, and super short, super narrow, wheelbase of only 86.5 inches. And it did come in some limited editions as well, which I will show you some pictures of now. Here's the skipper. It's dressed up with some alloy wheels, but this model also has the subdued look going on with the tinted windows and matte black accents. And then we have the Iron Cross, which again includes alloy wheels. It has roof rails, an upgraded grill tube / bull bar with some off-road lighting. And then there's also the Desert Cruiser, which has the same sort of bull bar as the Iron Cross, only minus the lights. You'll find the lights on the Expedition basket on this model, which is the most obvious feature. And finally, it has some pretty substantial mud flaps and a graphics kit. The model that's most notably different from the rest is the Duke, which has received quite a facelift. The seal beam headlights have been upgraded to composites, the bumper and grille are radically changed, side molding is included, and the rocker panel covers have been stylized. The rear bumper has also been updated slightly, and the interior has received a complete redesign. This one, however, is a totally stock, normal Pajero Mini. The only additions you will see to it are a ton of reflectors and a couple of giant turn signals that have been added. And the reason for that is because this is a Japanese domestic vehicle that has been imported to Canada. When the customer first rolled in, I thought that these reflectors on the sides here might have been German flags or something like that at first. I think the German flag has black in it actually, but at first glance I wondered if it was a flag, but it is not. It is simply reflective tape that's been applied to make this thing legal for, or to make this thing pass a BC inspection rather. So what I'm going to do to this thing is some bumpers, front and rear, as well as a front skid plate. And the eventual plan for this thing is for it to be getting a 2-inch lift and a little bigger tires to make it just slightly more capable off-road. And in fact, that lift is going to be happening before I finish the rear bumper. Reason being is because I'm going to need his new tire and wheel setup to match to the swing arm of the rear bumper. It's going to be a swing-away rear bumper. So I need this spare tire before I can complete it. But we'll get a start on the rear bumper while it's here this time. We'll get the base of the bumper produced. We should be able to produce the front bumper completely, and also the skid plate I would hope will be done as well. And then we'll have a good look underneath the vehicle, see if there's anything else that needs protecting under there. Right now he's just got me doing a front skid plate, but if it needs a transfer case skid plate or fuel tank skid plate or something else, then we will look at that as well. But so far we're going to start on a front bumper, which I have done before on one of these. I'll show you a couple of images of that. We'll do that front bumper. The one in the pictures here you'll see has a light bar incorporated between the skid plate and the bumper itself. We will not be putting a light bar in this one. The customer doesn't want a light bar, but it's going to be a bit of an interesting thing to fill that spot where the light bar is, because basically I'm going to wind up with a fairly large gap. There's a pretty considerable bulkhead behind this stock front bumper, and my bumper's not going to cover it completely. The customer was hoping in this case that we could bring this skid plate, this stock skid plate, well, we'd remove it, but basically bring a new skid plate a little higher up to give him better clearance. And as much as possible I'm going to do that, but I don't think there's a lot I can do. Let me turn the light on here for you, see if you can see a little better. So it's not a ton of clearance, but once I remove the skid plate and the bumper, I think we'll find that it's cutting it pretty close as it is. So we'll have a look at that, but it'll be interesting to figure that portion of the build out. Working on these things is kind of like a Suzuki Sidekick, which is, as many of you will know, my normal vehicles that I work on. I work on all kinds of vehicles, but the Suzuki Sidekicks and Vitaras are definitely my mainstay, my bread and butter. But this is a really similar little rig. Tiny, tiny vehicle, very, very square, and very basic and utilitarian. So I'm going to approach it in very much the same way. It'll be interesting to see what lies behind this rear bumper. I haven't had one of those off before, so we'll check that out together and see what we can do to fit up a rear bumper to this thing. The customer would like the rear bumper to protrude a little further out of the vehicle than the stock one. If we look straight down here, the stock one only sticks out maybe 2 inches, and we're going to wind up going about 4 or 5 inches out. So we'll come to about here. And the reason for that is he wants to just have a decent place to stand in order to get up to his roof. We'll do a nice checker plate, top plate, so that it has some traction for him, and we'll finish it with a textured powder coat again to give him a bit of traction. The rear bumper will have a receiver, not for towing because this little thing couldn't tow much, but for a bike rack or a little cargo rack, that sort of thing. And it'll also have some recovery points, and the front bumper will be just the recovery points and really nothing else at all. Some turn signals have been added here again to make this thing legal in BC. It needed the turn signals. They're massive. They're really not very attractive. So the customer's going to remove those, and I'm going to add some other turn signals and marker lights. We'll put a turn signal here. You'll see them again on that on the vehicle that I did previously. I installed them, so I'll show you a picture of that again now. But we'll do the oval turn signal lights and then the round little marker lights. And that will make a nice clean look, and then he's going to remove the giant turn signals that have been put on the sides here and do some body work to cover those up, or he might just use some plastic plugs to cover the holes. I'm not sure, but that's the approach. We will do a grill tube on this bumper as well, and it's going to be at a similar height to this grill tube. The one that I did on the previous Pajero was quite a lot lower than this one. In this case, we're going to keep it really similar to what's on the vehicle now. So that's about it for my intro. We will get this vehicle up on the hoist. We'll pull a wheel so that I can get a wheel bolt pattern so that I can create a spare tire flange for this thing. And we'll pull the bumpers off and see what we're dealing with. Before I start pulling these bumpers off, we may as well have a little look underneath the vehicle and familiarize ourselves with it and check for any damage, and we'll see if there's anything exposed that needs protecting in the future. So here's our stock skid plate. It is steel, very thin steel, but it's formed. It's not going to be completely weak. Again, it's going to be interesting to see how much more clearance I can gain this customer. I don't think it's going to be a whole lot. You can see these trailing arms right here are pretty close to the skid plate as it is, and it looks like there's some other structures that basically the mounts for those trailing arms are right there. So we won't be able to free up a lot, I don't think, but we'll do whatever we possibly can. Teeny little tie rods. There's your front axles. They're not particularly small. I'm fairly impressed with that. It's got a bit of an oil leak going on here. Very long front drive shaft for such a tiny vehicle. And there it is. Here's his T-case, which is one of the things I thought maybe would need protecting. Now there is an exposed portion right there, but if we bring the camera up, you can see that there's really almost nothing hanging down. In the right situation, he could hit the T-case on a rock, so I will offer to put a skid plate on here, especially being as it would be so very simple to create one. I just need to create the shape of this opening and then add some spacers to bring that down a little bit and put a drain hole in it, and then we'll have pretty much a perfect little plate there. So I think I will offer to do that for him. Here's our fuel tank. It has a stock skid plate, and it doesn't hang down super low, but the stock skid plate is very thin. I mean, look at that. very, very thin, insignificant stock skid plate. And it is a steel tank, so that's something that he might want to consider protecting in the future. I'll have to add a little mount to it right there for the e-brake cable, like the stock one has. But yeah, we might just want to add a skid plate onto that guy, because that is pretty weak. And that skid plate is also mounted to the flange of the tank itself, rather than to the tank, or rather than to the mount that holds the tank, which would be much better to mount it on the mount. So we'll look at doing that potentially for him. Rear axle looks very clean, no leaks. I believe his lift is going to give him different lower control arms. His lift is coming from Russia. Apparently there's very few aftermarket providers for these things, aftermarket suppliers. And he's getting a lift kit that comes from Russia, and I think he said it comes with new lower control arms for the rear, so that'll be interesting to see. Again, I'm going to have this thing back again after the lift is done to complete the rear bumper, so it'll be neat to see the transformation, and I hope that you guys all enjoy it as well. Clean looking vehicle, I haven't seen any rust whatsoever. Nice design. I think it's a pretty cool little rig, and now I am curious to get these bumpers off and see what we are left with. Front bumper corners are now removed. I had to remove the wiring for the lights, or disconnect the wiring for the lights rather, the signal and marker lights, and just remove a few plastic clips and a couple little 10mm head bolts that were securing the bumper up into the fender. You can see now the attachment points for the stock bull bar. You know, very thin. It's really just a decorative piece, as is this center section. It's just the thinnest tin that you could imagine. It's strictly there to cover up this little, I'm guessing that's maybe a power steering cooler, and also the radiator itself. So now I'm going to remove that, but I wanted to show you that I did also find some damage to this mount here. I noticed that the plastic bumper corner was pushed in at that point, so I suspected I may find some damage beneath it, and sure enough I have. But if we look at the mounts themselves, which are back here, sorry, let me get that light out of the way. These are the actual mounts that I'm going to be mounting my bumper to. So all of this damaged area in front is going to be removed with the bumper center section, I hope. I might be wrong about that. Let's pull it apart a little further and find out. If I am wrong about that, that means I've got some repair work to do. There you are, just a piece of 1/2-inch square stock welded in, filleted on both sides, and strengthens that thing really well. And then I added a little top cap, like I said, welded it both sides, and very strong there too. So nicely secured and reinforced, I should say, nicely reinforced and ready to go. So I'm happy with the mounts, and I've created some brackets to fit on the front. They're probably a little bit long, but I will shorten them. They come out 1.5 inches from the bracket surface, but this little power steering cooler is still going to be in my way. If you look, you can see it just protrudes ever so slightly. So I'm going to take that off of the bracket, and we're going to move it back a little bit one way or another, probably with just some spacers, or I may have to make a little intermediate bracket. But we'll pull it back a little bit so that it's got some airflow in front of it and behind it when the bumper is in place, and that will do the job. So rather than add a bracket, I actually removed an intermediate bracket. If you just noticed that there, that intermediate bracket positioned the cooler further forward than it necessarily needed to be. So I just removed it, and I am remounting the cooler in its same relative position using some rivets, and I'll double check the clearance with a straight edge, and we're good to go. Now I move on to cutting the wings of the front bumper using a plasma cutter. You could easily do this with a zip disc on a grinder as well. You don't have to have fancy tools for this stuff. The basic tools work just great. They just take a little bit longer. While I finish up the wing here, I'd like to take a minute to thank all of my recent subscribers, and also those of you who've taken the time to like and comment on the videos. It is hugely appreciated, and the support does make a big difference. So thanks again, everybody. I've recently taken the big step to purchase some awesome audio equipment and some new video equipment as well. So as promised in previous videos, you can definitely look forward to way better audio and video coming up. I know the audio has been an issue. There's a lot of echoiness, and it's tough to hear me in some of the clips, and I wanted to take care of that. So you can look forward to just as good at audio quality in the actual clips that are taken in the shop as those that are done by voiceover when I'm sitting at my desk like I am right now. There will be a couple of videos coming up between now and then that still have the poor audio quality because I do have some footage in the bank, as it were, but very shortly we'll be on to the new stuff. So these are the portions that you could call the sides or the wings of the bumper. They're going to attach to the center section, and they're actually going to go that way so that we get an angle up from the ground out towards the outside of the vehicle. I did a 2-inch dimension here, and that's because I've got 2-inch square tube that I'm using as the corner. So obviously it had to match that dimension. And then I went 1.5 inches out from my bed just so that I didn't want to come too close to the cut to compromise the strength of the tube. So I went with 1.5 inches there. Now, when I originally cut my center section, I cut it on 14-degree angles to sweep these back towards the corners of the vehicle. But it still wasn't quite enough. I'll show you that on the vehicle in just a minute. But I wound up putting a 5-degree cut on these guys so that I wind up actually with a 19-degree sweep back in total. But I just thought that was worth mentioning. So once I weld these up, as you saw on the time lapse, I go ahead and use a sanding disc, just a flat sanding disc, to make a nice flat profile on both edges so that I wind up with a nice sharp corner along here. And then from there, I take a blending disc or a flat disc. I always use a brand new one for when I want to create a nice radius like this, otherwise it just doesn't turn out nearly as well. So then I basically break that hard corner off by running about 45 degrees along it several times until I kind of get down to a point where I can see the type of radius that I want to create. And then of course I just start running it from very flat and then getting a little bit higher with each pass until I'm matching this surface. Pretty straightforward. You just want to make sure that you get nice, long, smooth passes. Don't be going halfway or anything like that. You want to do right from one end to the other when you're using this, and that's going to give you a really consistent, nice, smooth radius. Now, if I wanted, I could have tried to create this radius here, but it would be really challenging because I'd have to remove a ton of material, and I'd probably get right through my weld and I'd have to re-weld it. So I'm quite happy to go with a radius that's a little sharper on these sections, and I would advise that you do the same. This one, of course, is overlap, so let me start again there. This is a 2-inch wide tube. I used 2-inch by 1/8 or 1/8 by 2 flat bar to cap this with. I set it back so that we had a nice corner fillet to fill in here, and that's what I've welded out and blended. And that means that, of course, it overlaps on this side, which is actually really handy because that way it allows me to put a corner bead in here as well. So a really strong weld, and this one doesn't need to be blended out because it's on the back side of the vehicle, or back side of the bumper rather. Okay, so time to start putting this thing together on the vehicle now. I've got my mounts modified slightly. All I did was just shorten them by about 1 inch to make them look nice and even with the bottoms of the frame. I've got my power steering cooler, I believe this is, set back, so we've got clearance between the bumper, or the back side of the bumper, and the front side of the cooler, so that's ready to go. And I've got my center section cut. Now my center section, I set in place earlier. Keeps my brackets centered to the center line. And then I measured from this front corner out to an appropriate point here where I thought I would need my corner piece to be added. That was about 11¼ inches, so I cut that, and that's what you saw on the bench. That's what I refer to as a wing or side portion, the one that I plasma cut the angle into. Now, I calculated that I needed about a 14-degree sweep, so a 14-degree cut on this tube in order to bring that corner back nice and close to this corner of the vehicle, side of the bumper. Close to this corner of the vehicle, I should say. But I miscalculated. It came a little bit wide. I wanted to do another 5-degree sweep, so I just simply cut that wing on 5 degrees like I indicated earlier, and that gave me a compound 19-degree angle, sorry. And to that I added my corner. So I'll go grab those pieces now and we'll see what I mean. Alright, so here's that side piece or wing, and then this is what I'll call my corner piece. So this is what's going to go around the side of the vehicle. Alright, so I'm just going to use a magnet on the bottom of this tube to give myself a nice flat place to lay this guy, put that in place, and once I've matched up my angles, the combination of the 14-degree cut on here and the 5-degree cut on here brings me again to 19 degrees in total, which brings this back just nicely. So now when I add this corner piece, it looks really good. And that brings to a close part 1 of this series. As we move on, we'll get the front bumper all tacked together, and we'll double check the fit of it before attaching it to the mounting brackets and welding it all up. And we still need to sort out that skid plate, of course, and I'll show you how I dealt with the gap between the skid plate and the bumper. And we've still got an entire rear bumper to create after that, so there's plenty more to come. But thank you so much for coming back to Balmer's Workshop. It's always great to have you here, and thank you so much for sticking through to the end of the video. All the best to you, stay safe, stay happy, and we'll see you next time.